If you are connected to the world of public relations or communications in Toronto, you probably heard the name of Gabor, or perhaps you actually know Agota Gabor, better known to me as Aggie. So welcome, Aggie.
Thank you.
Anything I know about public relations, I probably learned through you or working for your company. You arguably invented media training in Canada, or at least you brought it to Canada, and that's what we have. You've got a couple books out: public speaking, presentations, media interviews, helping you succeed. So tell me what's in this book.
Steve Key, who was your guest the other day, and he very kindly said everyone in communications should have this on his or her desk, because it really is just tips for presentation skills and media interviews.
You used to charge big bucks for this. huge dollar. Now you're not giving it away, but you're selling it. Right?
Selling it for less than $10. So it can be useful to many people, those who would never be sent by their corporation to a workshop that would cost $5,000 a day, which is what we used to charge for about 7 people.
And a lot of it's preparation and rehearsing and that sort of thing. A lot of the advice you're giving in the book.
For sure, the structure of you. A couple of new things I included because I have, for example, some tips for women who present. I have some tips for people like me whose first language is not English.
Right.
I have some tips in there for the first minute of your presentation, how you can get rid of the butterflies, which is really common sense, but very, very important because the first and the last minute are very important. I have the structure of your presentation. Keep it simple, sweetheart. You know, the three tells. Tell them what you want to tell them. Tell them what you told them. Very, very nothing really basically new, but it's all there. So
it's all in there. Mm-hmm. So when we first started swapping emails about maybe talking about your book, just get another shot of it here. We were going to talk about this book, and I said to you, it'd be nice to. Well, you've had such an interesting life. I should also ask Aggie about. I don't know. I could ask her about some of the other things, and then you actually said. Well, I've got a memoir coming out. Some of these things I kind of knew about you. I mean, I just because people talk behind your back at work, right? So I knew you're from Hungary. I knew you had been a dancer. It's very personal. I do feel like I'm reading your diary at times. So how long did it take you to write, or did you go over it and over and over it, or how did it come together?
About 3-4 years ago, I wrote a short, I guess a half of the first chapter about being a ballet rat and how it was like, how did I get in, and the first chapter practically. I put it away because I got so busy. Everybody always told me for the last 25 years, you should write a book because you did so many different things. But I never considered myself a writer because I know how to write. I know how to write scripts, but I always depend on the visuals to fill in the details. So I never thought I could write a book. And so I just put this away. And then the pandemic came. And then I wrote the other book. And I realized I enjoyed writing. And that was very easy because really and truly I was just writing down what I'd been talking for 35 years. But then I went back to that first little essay or chapter that I wrote about being a ballet student and the life I had, which I loved. And I thought, I just keep on writing. And I fell in love with it. I just told the story as I remembered, and I do have a good memory.
So you were a dancer, a ballerina. You loved dancing. So tell me about being a little girl and loving dancing. And you were obviously very good at it.
Yes, I was told I was very good at it. And I think I was. I know I was. I got admitted to the Opera House right after the war. Before the war, I had a very difficult childhood, which I don't really remember that much. What I write about during the war, I remember some, but mostly it's my mom telling me. because I was too young, but it was terrible. But I did take classes until it was impossible because my mom was Jewish and we couldn't go to dance class anymore. But this was when I was 3 and 4, so this is more not much in my head anymore. But anyway, after the war, I got into the opera house, and it was a different life. I mean, we took class in the morning, and then we would an hour and a half every morning from 8 until 10:30. Then we went on to another classroom, another area of the opera house. This was all inside this beautiful Budapest Opera House, one of the nicest in the world. And we practically lived there. Then we learned the parts of children in the different ballets. That was all the morning. And then we would have lunch. Then we would have school in the afternoon in the opera house. Again, in one of the big dressing rooms, we would have school. And then at night, sometimes we would go home and sometimes we would be in the opera, whether we were the kids in Cavaliera Rusticana standing in the church, just as a backdrop to the singers, or we would do the Nutcracker, which I did dance 64 times. The pas de trois, that was my biggest accomplishment. So I loved it. I lived for it, and then it was a pandemic, not unlike, well, not an epidemic, not a pandemic, the polio epidemic. It was before the virus, 1 year before the vaccine, I'm sorry. 1 year before the vaccine, and I got it.
Polio. Right.
So that was hard. That was very hard.
And that has effectively ended any hope to be a professional in a ballerina.
Yes. And I was 15, and I had a very hard time coping with it. It was physically, I went to therapy, physiotherapy, very difficult for a year. I went back trying to dance because dance is very good exercise, so it would strengthen you, but I couldn't do it, and it just about killed me trying.
And it's affected you. At the very end of the book. So I didn't read the book. I just went right to the end. No, I'm kidding. I read the whole book. At the end, it says you needed to be encouraged to expand on the theme of polio in your life. Is this the kind of thing that you didn't tell anyone as the years go by? Like, were you embarrassed or ashamed?
Yes.
You always. Sorry,
never.
You never told anyone.
No.
So
and that, that's very true. Anna Porter told me that, actually. She she was Canada's first publisher. I don't know if you know her name.
Yes.
And she's a friend, and I did send her. She was one of the first person that saw the book. And she said, Aggie, I notice that you walk with a limp. Is that because of your polio? And I said, oh, I don't walk with a limp. She says, well, you do. And I said, well, sometimes, that was my life. I never told anyone of my fight continuously. And so she advised me to bring that theme stronger into the book because and really and truly she was so right, because it's an important fight in the book. And and it's getting me because I have post-polio now. So
40 years later, it comes back. Or something comes back.
Something comes back. I mean,
or the weekend. So you always needed to do special exercises for your leg.
I always exercised because I like it. It's in my, But now I do. But post polio comes back. It's not as bad as when you first get polio, but the same area, like my right leg, is the one that was really bad when I got polio, and it's now the one that's really weak with post-polio. So I keep on fighting.
So that mention at the end of the book about polio being a theme that needed to be developed made me think of the best way to talk about the book is not just to go over it, chapter by chapter, but pull out some themes. polio being one. And we've kind of hinted on it too, just reinvention, like just being forced to reinvent yourself time after time after time. And I think people will find that inspiring because there's your young life, but there's some romantic, your romantic life. You've reinvented yourself a few times, which we'll talk about later. Trust me. And I might keep that to the end so you don't walk out in a huff. Hungary, obviously, is in the book a lot because later in life you're able to visit. Then you're visiting a lot, and it's a big part of who you are is the country Hungary, right?
Very much so.
So you love returning.
I love it. I think you'll find that with most immigrants, you end up having two homes. When I go to Budapest, I say I'm going home, and then from there I come to Toronto and I say I'm coming home. So it never goes away. And I was very lucky when you want to talk about husbands, when I met my now husband and my partner for a lot of years. That's how I met him. We did a documentary on me returning to Hungary after there was an amnesty for all the refugees of the 56 revolution.
Another big theme in the book, really, is your mother.
It was very interesting. I love my mother, and yes, she was there with me when I was little, and she had to hide me from all kinds of horrible things. I probably would have been killed in Auschwitz if she didn't hide me. But then we were very close, just the two of us growing up, and then we left. And at 17, at the border, when we were walking through the border, Mom twisted her ankle. She couldn't walk. And then we were in refugee camp, and then we left, and something went wrong with her ankle. And then we were in Montreal, and all of a sudden, everything shifted because my father was living in Montreal at the time because they were divorced, and he left Hungary years before. My father said, okay, I get you a job as a waitress, and you can support your mom. So, within 2 weeks, I became the person who is going to take care. I spoke French. Mom didn't speak any English or French. And so my little French had to do the communications unless it was in Hungarian. And I was making money, and she couldn't get a job. So all of a sudden I became, it shifted. She used to take care of me, and now all of a sudden it kind of shifted. But we later became just partners, really. We had a dancing school, and she was very good at business, and she did the business part. At the time, that was my very first business, but she had more to do with it than I. I just taught, and she played the piano, and so we had another life together. And we had, no relationship is always perfect. She had her own ideas about my love life, which I didn't like. And that was difficult. But yeah, she was very important in my life. Very.
So talking about reinvention, so you worked not a ballerina, but you worked as a dancer in clubs, in nightclubs
yes.
in Montreal when Montreal was a little crazier.
It was extremely exciting. I was young and beautiful, and it was Las Vegas, like Montreal was nuts. And the Rosemary Bistro Cafe in Montreal was kind of in the center, right off St. Catherine's Street. And it was a meeting place of all the artists and the magicians and not the big stars, but the support people of all these big clubs. And that's how I met these people. And they said, well, if you know how to dance, which I did, it wasn't Swan Lake type of dancing because I became a good dancer. I was strong enough. And I think I was talented enough to compensate well enough to look good. And so I started doing the nightclub circuit. I had a couple of numbers, the Hungarian Csárdás, that's, Brahms number 5, which is always popular, as well as C'est Magnifique was my other number for the song C'est Magnifique. And I did very well. As a waitress, I made $40 a week with tips, and I was hired after I had my pictures taken, and I was making $125.
Which is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money at that time.
And these are Las Vegas-style nightclubs in Montreal.
Yes, and then I got into the Bellevue Casino. That was a big production. I was very lucky. I became a chorus girl, and it was great fun. And then I became a soloist, and that was even more fun. And then a long time, this is going back to history, but you might remember Drapeau, the mayor of Montreal, who decided to clean the city up and shut down all these big clubs. So that's when I reinvented myself, and I got a job at Arthur Murray's to teach ballroom dancing.
So you start teaching. That was in Montreal, or was that in Ottawa?
Yeah, Ottawa.
So you went to Montreal, and then you're teaching in Ottawa.
Yeah.
You came to Toronto. You're also teaching dance in
Yeah,
Toronto.
that's where I got the idea to put it on television.
So so you started your own company though in Toronto as well. Is that correct?
I started a studio, a dance studio with my mom.
Right.
And then I thought, well, if I can teach anyone how to do ballroom dancing, why shouldn't I teach the camera?
Right.
And so I went to, at the time, I watched CFTO morning show, and they had all these, cooking demonstrations and dress and design. And I thought, wouldn't that be good if I just did a little 8-minute segment about how to do the foxtrot, the cha-cha, this or that. And Dodie Rupp, who was a great pioneer for women in television, I was lucky enough that I got an interview with her, and she liked my idea. And they put me on CFTO in the morning at 8 o'clock or something, teaching dancing. And then Dodie got a job at CBC as head of daytime programming and Take 30, which was a national show. And she took me and my little segment with her, and it became very popular. And I did that for about 5 years.
So you're on CBC like once a week
week,
doing a
Friday.
daytime dance segment.
Dance segment, and then on Fridays, when Adrian Clarkson had the day off, I did this 15-minute segment, and I was a co-host with Paul Souls.
Yes, so Adrian Clarkson, Paul Souls, Take 30. I remember that show. So, and then that just grew. So it led to other things. Once you get into CBC,
and then
it led to other things.
discotheque came,
right?
and
disco
I started
dancing.
doing discotheque.
Right.
But at CBC, and then I got a job at CBC in production. Met my husband.
You were a script assistant at first.
I was script assistant, which I loved.
And researching and that sort of thing.
And then I went back to school and got a degree in journalism.
Right.
To Ryerson. And I went to Ryerson during the day, and I was a
So you were doing both at once for a while. Okay.
Yeah. It was good.
So you're busy.
You
were busy. You've always been busy. Yeah. Okay. You're almost like the queen of the cold call, and I'll explain what I mean by that. You spent some, 3-4 years in Hong Kong, and you walk right into a hotel in Hong Kong and get a job. And then you're living in London, England, and you walk right into a hotel and get a job. And you walk into the King Eddie in Toronto and get a job. What's your secret in those cold call meetings? Because what is it?
The first time I really worked in public relations, I was in Hong Kong doing freelance work for CBC. I was married to Bill Cunningham, who was CBC's foreign correspondent in Hong Kong. So we were living there. And I was doing freelance work for documentaries, and a friend said, "Did you ever do PR?" And I said, "No, but why?" And they said, well, because the Mandarin is looking for a public relations person. And the person who was running the department, Kain Lo, I didn't realize this, was leaving the next day for New York. She just got this call, and she was desperate. And that's how I got the job. My husband got a transfer to London. and it was an intercontinental hotel. So my general manager wrote a note, just an introduction to the manager who was going to open the Intercontinental in London. And so I got that job. So it was really being in the right place at the right time.
The CBC thing played out, I guess. So is that another reinvention? You decided at a certain point to go. It wasn't called. It was called Gabor Communications at a certain point.
The
right?
first time it was called Media Techniques.
Right.
And then I sold. I got the General Motors account for media training.
Right.
And practically 3 months later, McLaren Advertising offered to buy my little company. That wasn't even a company. It just had a couple of accounts.
Right.
But they were so protective of General Motors that they didn't want anyone training their chairman
Right.
on what to say. So they bought my company.
Right.
I was with them for 4 years, and then I left, changed the name because they had the name.
Yeah.
And then I had Gabor Communications, and then I sold to Grey Canada because I needed the money because I bought a house and the renovations went south.
Right.
And I really needed some money, so I sold out again, and I don't like working for big agencies.
Right. So the last 25, 30 years, you were
and
on
then
your
I
own.
left and on my own, and that's when you have kind of crossed my life with the Gabor Group.
So it's part of your personal history in the book. So it's like reading your diary at times. So I'm learning. So you married a Hungarian fellow, but in Canada. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay, I'm getting that right.
We met in the student camp in Petronell in Austria. We left the country. We had a big refugee camp in Eisenstadt. And it was not very nice, and a lot of people, and not very good. But there was a small place that somebody gave, an aristocrat gave to young students to stay, and so that's where I met my first love, and so we had a very innocent, romantic interlude. We were in love, but, kissing, one kiss was about all there was. And then he was going to look me up in Canada because my mom and I got on a plane, and he and his friend were going to go on a ship, and they did come, but somehow we didn't connect. And then 5 years later, I was walking on the street in Montreal, and I bumped into him. And a year later, we were married. It was great, but we had different plans for life.
And you divorced, and he ultimately went back to Hungary.
Yeah,
Is
he
that
did.
correct? Okay. You met Bill. You're married to Bill, and then, quite famously, for people that know you, you divorced Bill, and split for almost 20 years, and that could be a book or a movie unto itself. That story. Now, I mean, which one of the the unspoken themes of the book is forgiveness. Really, you don't say it, but there's obviously a story there. I mean, young Bill or middle-aged Bill was a bit of a scoundrel. I mean, you write it in the book, so I can say it to you. It's like, what is it about this story that
Why did I go back?
Well, I mean, you had a child with him and everything, but it is an interesting story, and there's no, in the book, there's no bitterness or anything. You clearly forgave him. I mean, you're not an overtly religious person or anything. You don't hold grudges by the sounds of it, but
Oh, I do.
you do hold grudges? Okay. I want to hear about the grudges then.
No. Sometimes even today, I will say something that comes from nowhere. That comes from that other marriage a long, long time ago. So everybody, you don't totally forget those things, but you forget being terribly upset about it. And okay, how do I say this? Okay, we were married. It was more like an affair because we always traveled. It was so what a big life, you know.
He was a foreign correspondent
Life.
back in the day.
Right.
So
Back
he
in
was
the day.
he was a
He-
swashbuckling. He was Vietnam, Northern Ireland, but all over the place.
all over the place. Then he became a big shot at CBC,
And
and
global.
and it wasn't what I really wanted. I wanted my own life. I mean, yes, he had affairs. That was one, and that was enough for me to get out of there. But I think that was another reason too. I didn't want to live his life. I wanted to have my own, and it was almost impossible because he had such a big life. You couldn't have your own life, you know. And we've thought about it, and it was a constant fight, and it wasn't fair because he was already an established television journalist and I was an immigrant, and I wanted to become all those things. So we fought. We were competitors within a marriage, and it all worked out until we had a child and we came back to Toronto, and he wanted me to take care of that child totally on my own, not disturb his life.
So he was
and-
really old school.
Totally.
Right.
And then we had the girlfriends. Where does that leave you? So we split. And then we were separate for a long time. And because we had a child, eventually we became acquaintances, friends. Cordial. And then I lived with someone for close to 10 years, and he had serial long-term relationships. And I suppose at one point, neither one of us had anyone, and we both liked sailing. And we had a colleague, Larry Solvay, who had a big boat. And we ended up sailing together with many other people. And we just kind of drifted together and started talking. And the good parts of what the attraction was in the first place was that we could always discuss and talk and enjoy each other's company. And that came back, and we started dating. And all of a sudden, and then we got together, and I didn't want to marry him again. I didn't see any reason to get married. We already done that. We had a child. Why? But Bill, would you believe it, said he has never lived with anyone that he wasn't married, whom he wasn't married to. And of course, our daughter Kathy thought that would be great, and so we got married. And we have a very good relationship now. It's been 25 years, so this time it worked. I think it's more even Steven too.
Has Bill read the book?
Yes, he read the book. He read the first 5 chapters, actually. He liked it, but he got very jealous at one point. He said, oh, my God, you know, you're going to get lost in his eye. I think that's in the book, My First Husband.
Ah.
And he was kind of a little uneasy about it. And then we had a talk, and I said, look, I'm not going to let you read anymore, because then it's going to influence how I write. But I said, I'll promise you that when it's finished, before it's too late, you can read the whole thing.
So I guess that when the question comes up, has Bill read the book, it's more about, obviously, when he's there, his shenanigans, and then the 20-year gap. And so he's cool
okay
with all of that?
Yeah, because I wasn't the sugar plum fairy either.
Right.
Maybe that's why I could forgive, because, you know, I was totally broken up when it happened. But if I look back on it, you know, everybody was doing it at that time.
Well, what, it's the 60s? Is that your excuse?
Kind of.
Why should I buy this book?
If there's any message that I want people to take away, is that it's worth reinventing yourself and keep on trying to create a life that you like, instead of just put up with what happens to you.
Have you sold the movie rights yet?
Not yet, but I'm certainly going to try. I think it would make a wonderful movie or a series.
Now, why should I buy this book?
Well, if you a person in the business world who has to do interviews, who has to make presentations, who has to represent either her own company or the company she works for or he works for. I think you find very helpful tips on how you can do that successfully.
Well, congratulations on writing 2 books during the pandemic, and they're both great. So thank you, Aggie.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.